Thank you very much. Excellent questions, and will allow us to continue our discussion of the burden-sharing matter. I took special note of a Spanish colleague's comment about, are we just a bank nowadays? I don't think of it that way. The way I think of this issue, and it is a serious issue for all of the countries in the alliance, I recognize. In 2000, all of the NATO allies spent 2% of their defense budgets on 2% of their GDPs on their defense. So it wasn't so very long ago that 2% of GDP was a well-accepted number around the alliance. What has happened in the years since, and we do, believe me, at headquarters recognize the issue. There was a very severe financial crisis, and many ministries of finance faced with severe social problems looked at this problem and said we need to be spending more of our GDP on social programs and fewer euros or national percentage of currency on national defense. So it was an understandable trend line that developed. But our point, again, looking at the problems that we are addressing today, more aggressive Russia, the rise of violent extremism, rise of ISIL, is that we have some very severe issues that we must deal with on the defense and security front. And so I think it is very timely to be considering again in a sense of our mutual national interest, looking at 2% of defense spending, 2% of GDP on defense spending. It is very, I think, significant that it is a matter and needs to be a matter of mutual national security interest, not just something that either comes to you from Brussels or comes to you from Washington. It's something that all recognize is in our mutual interest. There were a number of questions about how to coordinate, how do we consider working in future on this matter. I do want to stress that NATO has a very particular role in national security and defense. It is not focused, for example, on domestic policing, domestic security, but we must nevertheless look for ways to work and coordinate better inside NATO borders to be able to share when necessary important information, and I think that that is a very, very fair point to make. But in terms of our overall plans and how countries will be moving forward, by the way, it's not 28 national plans, it will soon be 29 national plans. Again, we expect to see these plans completed by the end of December. They will be refreshed on an annual basis. We will be discussing them at the Defense Ministerial coming up in February of this year. So it will be, so to say, a rolling process going forward, but we will have an opportunity to maintain a focus on how countries are implementing their action plans inside the alliance. It is a very important point, though, how we coordinate what kinds of capabilities we will be acquiring. And I want to stress again the point I made in my remarks, that we're not just talking about 2% as the most important marker here. The Defense Investment Pledge at Wales had three aspects to it. One was 2% of GDP. The second was the capabilities that allies can bring to the defense problems that NATO has, in other words, capabilities that NATO needs. And the third, very important contribution is to operations, how many troops or other capabilities, equipment, and so forth, an ally is providing to a NATO action or operations. So there are three pieces to that Defense Investment Pledge, and that is fully recognized in the action plans as they will now be developed. So the question how we coordinate among, already there are some ways to coordinate in place, including our annual our annual looks at capabilities across the alliance and the actions that allies take on an annual basis to commit to fulfilling those capabilities. That is a wide-ranging discussion inside the alliance that allows us to coordinate. We need to do it better. We are constantly looking at ways to do that. The other new development, and I'm glad cooperation with the EU was brought up by our Portuguese colleague, because that has become an increasingly important aspect of our work, particularly since last December's Foreign Ministerial, where we agreed to move forward with more intensive cooperation on 42 proposals with the EU. Those are now in implementation. And I must say that it has resulted already in better coordination with the EU. The staffs are working very well together. I say we're forming more day in, day out connective tissue with the EU. And by the way, I think the coordination activities that the EU undertakes as part of EU planning for defense will help in this matter of coordination inside NATO, and also help to pull into sharper focus some of the aspects of defense burden sharing. So I think it is really very positive the way we have moved forward with the EU, and I hope to see that continue. Finally, on the matter of how we will support allies on their own territory, I did want to mention one other factor and underscore the fact that we are forming this new intelligence unit that will be focused on this matter. I will underscore this issue when I get back to headquarters as to how we are going to help. I thought the point was a very good one, that some of the allies don't actually have the national resources to perhaps form a 24/7 counterterrorism watch center. And, you know, thinking about how NATO, with its new focus on provision of intelligence information and so forth, may be able to be helpful in this regard, is an important issue, which I will take back to headquarters with me. So thank you for that. What hope do I have that we are on a different path from earlier? My hope comes from two very important bars. Secretary General Stoltenberg has a famous now chart that's been shown that shows from 2000 up through 2014, bars down below the line all red, and some during that financial crisis I mentioned a moment ago were very low indeed, as defense expenditures across the alliance dropped off significantly during that crisis period. But in 2015, after the Wales Summit, frankly, it was the Wales Summit, and I like to stress that fact. It wasn't in the last 6 months that this happened. It was after the Wales Summit that a small green bar appeared above the line. And by the following year, that was 2015, by 2016, the bar had raised by approximately 3.8%, which amounts to approximately $10 billion, yes. So this is significant. Those are estimates for 2016. We are closing the books soon on 2016. In June, Secretary General Stoltenberg will put out the final numbers for 2016 and estimates for 2017. So my hope rests in those two green bars, but I hope that in addition 2017 will continue to show momentum in the direction of increased defense expenditure, and that will be very, very important. So that is where the hope springs from, I have to say, and I do want to give due credit to the allies at the Wales Summit, focusing on the necessity of moving forward on this issue, again, because it is in everyone's mutual security interest to do so. 2014 was truly a watershed year for this alliance, following Russia's incursion into Ukraine, seizure of Crimea, and the seizure of Mosul by ISIL. But I do want to again record that the roots were established in 2008, frankly, right on the cusp of the financial crisis. by the Russian incursion into Georgia, which are the roots of, I think, what happened in Ukraine in 2014. So very, very important that we are now, as one, moving out on this issue, and the momentum is in the right direction. On the question of hybrid warfare against NATO member countries, it's very good, I think, that NATO, again, has had a very strong wake-up call on this matter in recent years. It is now an explicit aspect of what NATO is focused on in terms of our operational challenges. So the spectrum does not begin at the low end of the conventional scale and proceed to weapons of mass destruction use as it might have during the Cold War, but there is a new focus on real attention to the hybrid part of the spectrum. And so there is a Hybrid Warfare Study Center that has been established, but I do want to assure you it's not some kind of abstract thing that is only really being studied per se. It is something that day in, day out is present in how we plan for operations, in how we plan our training, and in how we exercise and train. So hybrid warfare, we're looking to a CMX coming up in October, and that will be a high-level exercise that will focus very much on the hybrid end of the spectrum. So there is a real-time attention to this matter in the alliance. It will continue to be so. Cohesion inside NATO is a constant issue, frankly, because the unity of the alliance is its glue. And the unity of the alliance is built around consensus. And so, yes, we have differences. I do want to stress, and again, Sec Gen Stoltenberg constantly stresses this point, we always have differences day in, day out. We just went through the mighty struggles that always precede a meeting of heads of state and government, a meeting of ministers, whether foreign or defense ministers. There are many issues that must be argued, and countries must be brought along to make the necessary decisions in their national capitals to reach consensus. So I think we need to embrace difference. It's part of what makes the vitality of the NATO alliance. I can't say it's easy to deal with. It's an extraordinary amount of heavy lifting, but you as parliamentarians certainly understand the process, the heavy lifting that requires all of us sometimes to get to consensus. So I don't see it as a fatal flaw of the alliance by any means. It is part of the reality of the situation, and it is something that we must constantly, I think, work because we are constantly working toward unity and consensus so that we can move the alliance forward. So in essence, that cohesion and unity are the glue that holds the alliance together, and that glue, the main ingredient, is consensus. So I don't worry so much about cohesion inside the alliance, but it is something we must be attentive to and work to sustain and maintain every single day. Georgia. I said in my opening remarks that you are a very special aspirant country, and that is, I think, a very important point to underscore. We do value very much Georgia's longstanding contributions to the alliance. The 800 personnel in Afghanistan were mentioned, but I also wanted to say I understand that 35 of your young soldiers have died in Afghanistan. They have paid the ultimate price, and that is something we all mourn, and something that we all mourn on behalf of the families and friends of those young people as well. But it is, I think, important to make note of the fact that Georgia still will have some continuing hard work to do in terms of bringing the armed forces to a certain level of training, to a certain level of institutional structure, and so there are still reforms that need to be implemented here in Georgia. For that reason, I am very happy to have the team here that NATO has in our local office. We have a very skilled group of people here with many countries around this room contributing voluntary national contributions, experts to come here and help work on this very important process of reform. So in terms of the timescale, I'm not going to make any predictions today, but I do see the momentum and I see the trajectory, and they are both in a positive direction. Two excellent questions on the Arctic. First of all, I do want to say that this area is of extraordinary importance, and NATO recognizes extraordinary importance in a strategic sense, and the climate changes that have been developing speed there have only heightened that sense of the strategic importance of the region. So NATO is both concerned in an historical sense about the Arctic region, but also very, I would say, also seized of the matter that there is this environmental issue, rapid climate change going on there. So both aspects are something that, that NATO has been fully embracing. We do, I think, count a lot on our Arctic members, on Norway, on Iceland, and other Arctic members of the alliance to really help guide debate and discussion on this matter. Canada, of course, Denmark, others have a very important point of view as well and continue to help us to move forward on these issues. I think that in terms of comprehensive situational awareness, which was the question our Norwegian colleague asked, I do want to underscore that it is the Arctic members of NATO who help us to who help us to understand really what the situation is in the Arctic, to fully understand it. The United States, of course, also being an Arctic country with Alaska. So we do need your help inside the alliance for that understanding, first of all. But second of all, I wanted to applaud the work of the committee in this assembly, and we look forward to seeing your report on this matter, because we do appreciate inputs that come from other sources in addition to our own members of the alliance. So I think that that is very important. The third area, of course, and I mentioned it briefly during my remarks, but we now have a division in NATO devoted to intelligence matters that is organizing better our intelligence work inside the alliance, and that does help also on this problem of situational awareness. But turning to the points that our Icelandic colleague made, we are concerned about both the strategic aspects of this, and the question was, can NATO be more active in the area? In certain respects, NATO must be more active in the area. We have not heard, or I had not heard, the expression Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, the GIUK gap, for well over a decade, when last year it again sprang on the scene, and when I was still in Washington, there began to be an ever more active discussion of the necessity for us to be more intently focused on anti-submarine warfare than we had been for many years, and particularly in the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap area. So, of course, there are really military challenges developing to which the NATO alliance has not paid sufficient attention for many, many years, and we need to up our game with regard to anti-submarine warfare. And we need to look at what capabilities we need to renew in that area. We need to look at what kind of training and exercises. We really welcome that there will be a significant exercise in Iceland this summer built around the problems of ASW and the GIUK gap. So it is very, very important, I think, that we redouble our efforts now to be paying attention to this issue, because it is not only, of course, a matter of environmental concern, but also of strategic concern to the alliance. Latvia, the question on how to communicate better with NATO publics. And indeed, we are really focusing on how to do this now. Your burden sharing comment is a very good one, because it is a complex matter, and I agree with you. I don't think we do communicate adequately the various parts and pieces of burden sharing and what it means. So it's really, I think, in recent times, a wake-up call, particularly after last Thursday's meeting, that we need to be able to talk really in a very detailed and serious way, but nevertheless one that communicates easily with the publics about what defense burden sharing means in these action plans and in the defense investment pledge from Wales. We are in current times making an effort to do this better by really organizing our work better. You might have noticed, if you were watching the television last week, at our new headquarters, there were a number of very big banners hung up with a hashtag, "We Are NATO." And that is our first attempt at a more strategic approach to public messaging, to have a public information campaign that provides information to publics across the alliance and also to partner countries as well, so that the publics will understand a little bit better, and to help the governments in those countries, including the parliaments, to communicate a little bit better with publics than has been the case in the past, to provide some more comprehensive but easily usable information, good information about the alliance. For one thing, to counter disinformation, to counter fake news and so forth, to help to provide good information for publics across the alliance. So I urge you, if you are interested in this matter about better communications with your publics, to check out our We Are NATO campaign, because there really is a very, very good information kit that goes along with it, and it can help for you and your staffs to begin perhaps to get your arms around this problem a little bit better in your own countries. To our Lithuanian colleague, I can simply answer yes to everything you said. Of course, the best way to engage in successful dialogue with the Russian Federation is to ensure that your deterrence and defense are strong. And that is everything that we have been doing, including in the 3 Baltic states and in Poland, in the formation of the 4 battle groups that are being put in place this summer pursuant to the enhanced forward presence decisions that were made at the Warsaw Summit last July. And I think not only is the necessity of strong deterrence and defense, but also decisiveness. And so I want to again congratulate countries across the alliance who moved out decisively after the Warsaw Summit to put those battle groups in place. And I am so proud that this June they are all being certified. Already the exercises are underway. I was just in Estonia a few weeks ago to the top of base to watch the process beginning of exercising to certify the battle group there in Estonia, with UK, France working very closely together with their Estonian counterparts. And that is the same across the Baltic states and in Poland for the 3 additional battle groups. So that decisiveness, the speed at which we've implemented that discussion, that shows that we are strong in our deterrence and defense response. And on that basis, we can engage in dialogue. And we believe it's important to engage in dialogue with Russia because, again, it is in our interest to do so, to ensure that the incidents that have been occurring, particularly those at sea or in the air over the Baltic Sea, that those incidents do not spin out of control and lead to crisis and, heaven forbid, to conflict. So it's on that basis alone that I see the importance of a good and substantive dialogue with Russia, and that is where we are placing our focus. But I want to stress first and foremost that when we sit down at that dialogue table with Russia, that Russia's aggressive actions and laterally in Ukraine are really the focus of attention. So we talk about that on a clear and steady basis. So I think it is very, very important that we bear in mind the necessity of keeping our deterrence and defense strong as we engage in dialogue. I really am welcoming this opportunity to talk further about EU-NATO cooperation, and I thank the representative of the European Parliament for his question on this, because as I said, and you quoted Sec Gen Stoltenberg and his remark that it is now normal for the EU and NATO to be cooperating. And I understand, again, I'm fairly new at my job, but I understand that in past years they were more often butting heads as institutions than working closely together. But in just the 9 months now since our December ministerial, I myself can see the development of much closer institutional coordination between the two entities. And I do see that parliamentarians have a role in continuing to push that cooperation and continuing to nurture it and to encourage it in every way you can, because I think, frankly, there are differences in agenda, for one thing. Clearly, NATO is a defense and security alliance, and so our primary focus will be on defense and security. EU, while it has its defense agenda, also is very much focused on the development of strong and healthy economies in countries where we are providing assistance. So that is, as we think about it, that is the necessity for projecting stability, that the economies of the countries become more healthy, that the countries themselves become more politically stable. And so NATO and the EU, we both have tools in our toolkit, but they are separate and distinct tools. It's only when we put our toolkits together that we have a comprehensive set of tools to work on the problems that are inherent to projecting stability, building institutions, and developing at the heart of it the means and methods for wrestling with the problems of violent extremism and terrorism that have become such a scourge for so many alliance members. So I do think that parliaments have a big role in continuing to encourage the development of our cooperation. I don't want to make it sound too rosy. It's by no means perfect yet. There are still a lot of bumps to be smoothed out. So you can definitely play a role in encouraging our continuing cooperation. For Armenia, again, thank you for your role over the years in the Partnership for Peace. I know that we have recently had some very good meetings to talk about your plans going forward, and I very much welcome the good work we've been able to do together on defense reform and capacity building. Also on military education, as I understand, military education and training. So we are very keen to see that continue. We recently had a high-level visit to Yerevan. We would like to see that kind of interaction continue. Your idea is a good and interesting one, to think about more close interregional partnership for closer coordination and for perhaps doing some lessons learned as well between and among various regional partners. So that's another one I'd like to take back with me to headquarters to discuss further, but thank you for the idea. Italy's question, our Italian colleague's question, we are bearing in mind the particular challenges on the southern front, and we are particularly bearing in mind these challenges because NATO is increasingly present. I'm thinking about our two maritime operations going on there, Operation Sea Guardian, wherein we are working closely with the EU Operation Sophia in the central Mediterranean, and the naval operation in the eastern Aegean, both of them focused on the particular issue of the strong migrant flows over the past several years across the Mediterranean and the Aegean and into Europe. And so NATO, I would say by the very fact of its engagement and involvement in recent times, has increasingly had a wake-up call as to the particular challenges confronting our southern allies. And in that context, you can see, I mentioned in my remarks, our new hub for the South in Naples. This gets to the question by the Portuguese colleague as well a moment ago as to what more we are doing. I mentioned the hub for the South. That is currently taking shape. I do understand that it is now being staffed up. I was just briefed by SACURE, along with Secretary General, not very long ago, about 10 days ago, and the staffing up of the Hub for the South is proceeding apace. This is located in Naples, and it is focused specifically on better coordination, better information sharing for the challenges that NATO and the allies face in the southern region. In addition to which, some very particular actions have been undertaken recently. For example, we, as the North Atlantic Council, the NAC, we went to Kuwait 2 months ago to open a new training center that was built with the help of the Kuwaitis and those countries around the Gulf who are increasingly interested in cooperating with NATO and engaging in training and capacity building with NATO. So that center will be focused on training and capacity building, and specifically to bring new capacity for the fight against violent extremism and the fight against terrorism to that region. Another very trenchant example is our recent interaction with Libya, with Mr. al-Sarraj sending a letter to the Secretary General a few months ago asking for support from the NATO alliance. We have had recently a team in Tunis to speak to the Libyans and to others who are working there. By the way, the EU mission and the UN missions have been very, very helpful in helping to form a NATO agenda for working with Libya, and again to deconflict what EU is doing there, as well as the individual countries working there, from what NATO may contribute. So this must be a group effort. It cannot be NATO alone. Again, we do not have all the tools in our toolkit to do so, but we are increasingly paying attention to the challenges from the South and doing everything we can in working with other interested individual countries, but also partners in the international organizations to make a difference there. So that is an increasing trend, and I think it will continue to be a very, very much a priority for NATO going forward. I just wanted to thank Austria. I think in answering these last two questions, I answered the question more or less, but I did want to take note of the strong partner that Austria is, particularly in the Western Balkans. We haven't really talked about the Western Balkans much at this setting this morning, but it was very much discussed at the NATO Heads of State and Government meeting last Thursday. There is a general concern around the NATO table, the NAC table, about developments in the Western Balkans, and Austria has been playing an incredibly important role, both in bringing Austrian troops to Bosnia and Herzegovina, to KFOR, for help in operations in the region, and I just wanted to express my appreciation for Austria's partnership with NATO, particularly in that Western Balkan setting, but in other settings as well. But as we haven't yet really talked about Western Balkans, I did want to mention that particularly. Thank you. Again, 3 excellent questions. I thank all of you for the excellent caliber of this discussion this morning. These are some tough questions. I will do my best. Canada, your question is especially challenging because technology is moving faster, I think, than we can sometimes incorporate it into our defense capabilities. And so it's a very important and urgent question. We do have some mechanisms within NATO. We just completed, for example, a special study by an outside group of experts looking at how we can enhance and speed up the acquisition of capabilities that are jointly acquired because of the very problem that by the time they are finally acquired, from beginning to end, often a process of 16 or more years, technology has moved on. We need, as an alliance, to be better able to incorporate new technologies, particularly as in our joint capabilities, in jointly acquired capabilities. So the capability outputs that each country makes, that's one aspect, but as you referred to the necessity of thinking through also how we achieve coherence inside the alliance in terms of capabilities jointly acquired, I think that is also a very, very important point. Coherence is one of the big buzzwords in the alliance right now. How do we achieve coherence on a number of different trajectories? And so I welcome this question. I want to assure you it is a priority for attention in the alliance. I also wanted to refer you to a study I heard briefed this weekend by General John Allen at GlobeSec. Some of you may have been there. Actually, you probably wouldn't have been here because you've been here in Tbilisi, but General Allen and his team on behalf of GlobeSec are working on a study on precisely this issue of how to better incorporate and more speedily incorporate new technologies and innovation into jointly acquired capabilities in the alliance. And they are soon to be reporting out their conclusions on this matter. So he gave an initial briefing. I thought he had some, and the group has some very, very good ideas that we as an alliance are going to need to look at. And I commend you the study, and you'll have to draw your own conclusions as to what you think about it. But it is a very significant and important problem, and I do think that our new national plans with the focus on capability outputs gives us inside the alliance, as well as working together with national capitals, a new opportunity to focus precisely on how we do this better, how we incorporate new technologies into our capabilities as a national matter, but also in terms of jointly acquired capabilities. Turkey's question on climate change impacts, you know, frankly, I do welcome again that this is a working group inside the Assembly and that you have been focused on this problem because, frankly, I think there has been inadequate attention to this as a spur for continuing waves of migration. It is a fact that we have seen this historically, and it could very well prove to be the case again. In fact, I think we are already seeing some of those effects following the waves of severe drought in North Africa. So I do commend the group for this work. It is something that we are also paying attention to in NATO. We do have a division that focuses on these matters and tries to bring these issues to the NAC table and to the other levels of discussion in the alliance and to decision-making in the alliance, but we will look forward to seeing the results of your work, and we'll certainly want to work with you on carrying forward some efforts at solution, particularly in terms of what NATO can do as a defense alliance. And again, we have a very particular role on defense and security. We cannot do everything inside the alliance, but we do have a very particular role. So thank you for raising that issue, and we look forward to the results of your work. Finally, very astute noting that you are welcoming me back in my new capacity. I don't think many in this room know that I was actually present in 2006 when the NATO Parliamentary Assembly met with the Russian State Duma and other representatives of the legislature in Sochi, not so very far away, and that was actually the first time that I spoke to the Parliamentary Assembly in the capacity of director at the time of the Carnegie Moscow Center. So I do want to say so much has happened since that point, but I saw on that occasion, and some of you who were there may also have felt, I thought it was palpable that a negative attitude was developing already among the Russian parliamentarians on that occasion over 10 years ago at this point. And so in some ways, we were getting wake-up calls for what happened in 2008 and latterly in 2014 and since at the parliamentary level, even in that period. But I very much welcome this opportunity to speak to you today. Again, it's really been terrific, and I hope to have more opportunities going forward because it is extraordinarily useful for me to hear your points of view. Your question on arms control and what's going on with the OSCE so-called structured dialogue, I think we need to be cautious. We do already have in place a series of conventional arms control agreements and treaties in Europe. We have the Vienna document, which is an agreement on confidence and predictability measures. We have the conventional arms control Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, the so-called CFE Treaty, which the Russians have not been implementing since 2007. Again, another wake-up call, which we were acutely aware of at the time, but how it all fits together, I think, has only become clear in latter periods. By the way, we're all concerned that Russia has not fully been living up to its commitments under the Vienna document as well to notify on major exercises such as the upcoming Zapad 17 exercise. So there are considerable concerns in that realm. The Open Skies Treaty, another treaty where we have concerns about Russian compliance. So I think that we have a body of treaties and agreements that are important, that are significant, and that at the moment are being inadequately implemented. And we need to look for ways to work on solving those problems before we march forward, just set them aside and march forward to a new conventional arms control regime. I'm not saying those regimes are perfect by any means. In fact, some of them are structurally out of date because CFE was developed as a treaty between the Warsaw Pact and NATO. So we need to be thinking, for example, about how to move forward. Indeed, we did so in an adaptation of the treaty. We need to be thinking about how we work on the basis of those existing regimes rather than setting them aside and marching forward to a new conventional arms control regime. So I do think that that is an important matter for continued attention, not so much by NATO, but by the member countries of the OSCE. But in the meantime, I do commend the work of the so-called structured dialogue under the umbrella of the OSCE. They will have a new meeting coming up on the 7th of June to talk about force posture and exercises. I think it is an excellent forum because it is a very inclusive forum throughout Europe, and you are involved in it around this room. And I think it can help to elucidate some of the major issues now and help us to think more clearly about what we do to move forward with the existing treaties and agreements. Thank you. Let me again take each of these questions in turn. And as to stamina, I do note the respected delegation from the United States of America, our congressmen and senators. I'm accustomed to testimony for long hours in front of the U.S. Congress, so this is a new level of challenge being in front of multiple parliaments at once. But as to the time involved, it's frequently 2 hours or more, so we get used to it. Slovenia's question about the Western Balkans, yes, it is indeed a situation that is explosive, and we do agree that it is important to continue, both NATO and the EU, to be very present there and to do what we can to support and bolster reforms, to continue in some cases, as in the KFOR operation, to provide for security training and for downright security in the region. And so we will continue those efforts. I think it's very important. Furthermore, I can commit to this group that we will continue to do so at a high level. The Secretary General visited KFOR and Bosnia and Herzegovina in February. We have had our senior military leadership visiting there frequently. I can't tell you how many times Sakir has been in the Western Balkans in recent months, but he goes very, very frequently, as does the chairman of the military committee. So, and I myself, in fact, my first trip as the Deputy Secretary General was to Montenegro for a very important emergency response exercise that they hosted back in October. And I wanted to use that example to point to what I think is very important. Again, we must continue to be present, but we must continue to be present at all levels and in ways that benefit those societies, because many of those societies do not feel, 100% for NATO or 100% for EU membership. There are many who criticize both organizations and are pulling in another direction. And so I think when we go to those countries, we need to be working with them in ways that really shows that, we have joint interests, we have mutual interests, and we can help to develop capacity that they need. This emergency response exercise was a great example because they were focused in that case on rescue, water rescue. Those states around that region had suffered many catastrophic floods in recent years from heavy rainfall, and so the notion of focusing exercise and training on water rescue, it may seem like a very simple thing, but it was very easy then to tell the Montenegrin public when I was there, we are here because we are helping your emergency response forces be better able to deal with catastrophic flooding going forward. It's not all about defense per se, it's about areas where the NATO alliance can help you with problems that you have to maintain your society, to maintain your economy, and to maintain the survival of your people, in that case, against a natural catastrophe. So I think that's a very, very important point, and it's where NATO continues to pay attention. I know EU pays attention to those kinds of factors as well. For our UK colleague, I cannot tell you how many stacks of IBAN reports arrive on my desk on a monthly basis, and so I certainly can endorse and stress that we feel that this transparency is very, very important. I know, and it happened before my time, I know that it was on behalf of pressure from this organization as well as from several different directions that more attention came to be paid on the institutional accounting, the so-called IBAN reports, but I can definitely undertake that we will continue that attention. I will continue. I can't promise I read them word for word from beginning to end, but I always read the summaries and I read the recommendations very carefully and read the annual results very carefully as to how they have come along and where they are failing to come yet up to full level of the quality that we expect. So we do keep a close eye on this, and I personally am engaged in that process. And finally, on the Netherlands question, two questions actually. Let me just circle back on cyber. I'm sorry, I forgot our Slovenian colleague asked about cyber and cyber response. The Alliance as well is almost daily suffering cyber attacks, and so we have a lot that we must do for our own institutional networks, and so we are constantly focused on this. I've been in charge of the move to the new headquarters as well, and one of the main reasons why we haven't been able to start the move is that we wanted to make sure the new networks in the new building were as immune to cyber attacks as they possibly could be. Now, the cyber criminals and the countries who are involved in these cyber attacks are very smart, very good at what they're doing, so they're constantly finding new ways, but we have to make sure as an alliance that our networks are as defended as they can possibly be, and we have to be light on our feet. We have to be able and capable of finding quick responses when new types of attacks appear. So we are constantly alert to our own institutional networks. That's one layer where we're working this problem. But last summer at Warsaw, the Alliance decided that cyber must be an operational domain. It must be a domain of operations like the conventional domain, for example. And so we are also working as a matter of our operational planning, training, exercising to figure out exactly how cyber is incorporated into Alliance policy at the military level. This, I will stress, is taking place under the rubric of our overarching principle that NATO is a defensive alliance. Therefore, we are treating the cyber threats as a problem of defense as a problem of defense, and I do want to stress that there is not an offensive aspect to how NATO, as NATO, thinks about this problem, but we are alert to it and working at several different levels. Let me take the Netherlands question in reverse order because, well, actually, I think I'll take the capabilities question first and then end up on Article 5 because it will be a good wrap-up unless new questions have emerged. No? All right. On how we look at moving forward on the capabilities front, I sense around this room a lot of commitment and understanding that your countries are engaged in providing NATO the capabilities that it needs to do operations, to be able to, a great example I mentioned in my remarks is that many countries have stepped forward now to provide for tanker capacity for the AWACS planes so that we can stay aloft longer on our missions related to the anti-ISIL coalition. And indeed, we are enhancing that effort now. Coming out of the meeting last Thursday, we will be focusing on some additional air traffic control operations to support the anti-ISIL coalition. And the more in that crowded airspace our NATO AWACS can stay aloft to provide that important air traffic control, the better and more effectively others can perform their roles in the counter-ISIL coalition. So we want to be able truly and really to continue to nurture those joint capabilities, and it is very important. But we also need to make sure that we're looking for ways for the allies to get proper credit for that in their annual plans. I am convinced, frankly, seeing the sophistication of the discussion as to how we came up with these annual plans and how they will be put together, that there will be due attention to giving nations credit for the joint capabilities that they are providing to the alliance. So I can say no more about it at this point since the proof of the pudding will be in the making. That's a good old, I don't know in your language whether there's a slogan like that, but I certainly have every reason to be confident at this moment that there will be attention to it in any event. Now, on Article 5 and the Article 5 debate. First of all, I believe we need to look at Mr. Trump's presence at NATO headquarters last Thursday in two important ways. First of all, his very presence there in the dedication of the Article 5 and 9/11 memorial spoke to the commitment of the United States of America to Article 5 and to our common defense. There have been a lot of people who have remarked in that regard. In fact, Sean Spicer, the President's press secretary, put out some press lines to that effect even that very day on Thursday. So, and General McMaster, the National Security Advisor, over the weekend reiterated those points that the very presence of the President and his actions really underscored the strong commitment of the United States of America to Article 5. Sec Gen Stoltenberg also remarked on this during his press conference. So that's not entirely satisfying to countries. I know it's not entirely satisfying to you and to publics. But then I would ask you to look at the other point that I wanted to stress in this regard, and that is last Tuesday, a week ago from tomorrow, the national budget of the United States was rolled out. And it was a budget in the defense budget that called for an additional $1.4 billion for the European Reassurance Initiative. Our national budget, as I know for many of your countries, comes from the President. It comes from the executive branch, and then it must go to the Congress for congressional oversight and scrutiny, adjustments, and changes. But as far as the message out of the White House is concerned, and by the way, the President reiterated this point to the presidents and prime ministers around that dinner table last Thursday night, he said we put in new and significant money for the European Reassurance Initiative, and I hope that our Congress will support it. So as far as the President is concerned, to me, that is the most significant message you can take away about the meaning of Article 5 and our cooperative mutual defense commitments under the NATO alliance. In this case, I'll use another cliche slogan. The money of the United States is where its mouth is, so to say. And that includes President Trump as well. So if there are no further questions, it just remains to me to thank you all very much once again for this opportunity. I wanted to take note, I was remiss earlier not to mention the presence today, as well as the President, Prime Minister, and Chairman of the Parliament here in Georgia. I wanted to mention the presence of Chairman Aperobi of the Ukrainian Parliament as well, and I know he will be speaking to you next. I truly welcomed the opportunity to meet with him when I was in Kiev in April, and the work of the Parliament in Ukraine is extraordinarily important to Ukrainian processes of reform as well. So again, I'm very glad to have had a chance to see him here today, and I'm very glad to have had this chance to speak to you all about the goals of the NATO alliance and where we go from here. And my final appeal is we look forward to your help and advice. I look forward to seeing the results of many of your studies, and look forward to future opportunities to engage with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Gottemoeller. Thank you for your great speech and for your clear and very important answer to all very numerous questions you got from our audience.